Okay? But what I'd like to ask the panel first of all is, what are the biggest risks, would you say, in a well-meaning, traditionally managed business really embracing inclusivity to make diversity work? Laura, this is
Okay, so I suppose the risk is that you're doing something different. Some people will like that, some people will not like that. We've certainly seen that there are people that have got on board and that there have been people that have got off. So there will be change within the business, not just on a level that you're trying to introduce, but equally there will people be that that they don't like it, and so they may have to join another area or another business that is more in keeping with their values and how they want to work. So there is a risk that you can lose people, but equally it's an opportunity for you to develop people as well. But one of the things that we saw is that when maybe some of those people are removed, the people underneath them sort of flourish. They maybe have been holding people back that you weren't aware of, and so actually you get more without those people in place than you maybe did before.
Sure.
But it's risk.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest risks we see is when a business talks about inclusivity and diversity and really makes it a big statement, but they don't follow through. So what that does is a really toxic combination, because the employees are aware of it, and so they're looking out for it. And then when it doesn't happen, they feel much more alienated and more likely to try and get into a conflict position. So it's a very toxic mix of having that as the big vision and spreading that message, but not delivering it on the ground. I think that's quite a big risk.
I'd say I'd build on that. I think one of the biggest mistakes people make with any change is to leap in and make change. When you're changing any process, it's much more about listening to start with. So if you try and leap in and become more diverse, more inclusive, without really thinking about it, without listening, you're just going to make mistakes because you don't know what you're doing.
And you don't know what you don't know. Absolutely.
Yeah, no.
I think the biggest risk is that change is messy. When you go in and you change something from what it was, there's the way it was suited a number of people to your comment. So it suits a number of people, and when you then want to go here, the people it suits will become dementors, right, literally. And they will undermine, terrorize, and they will keep doing that. And so I've been in a lot of sort of restructurings and turnarounds for large organizations, and it's the same pattern we see all the time. The people who doesn't want the change become terrorists, and then you have to let them hang themselves in the string that you give them to be as much terrorist as they can possibly be. And interestingly, because they don't want the more enlightened change, they're really good at hanging themselves, and then they find out naturally at some stage that they've got to move out because actually this movement is not stopping. But sometimes they win. And that's the other real big risk. Sometimes they win. So you have to actually allow them to hang themselves.
And is there a point where you can make a decision about whether you're going to stop them winning or sort of allow them to win and let the play itself out?
That doesn't work. You have to stop. You have to, if they start winning, you've got to then go in generally from the board and then cut through the shit and then get them out, basically. Sorry. This is why people are scared of me.
Peter?
Well, I'd echo what's been said. I mean, I think your points were spot on. People get very comfortable in their little tribes, and then you're going to disrupt that tribe. But it can work from both ends, and this conformity thing is such an interesting thing, because of course we've talked a lot about authentic management, and sometimes you think, so does that mean I can just be an arse all of the time? We've all got to sort of fit within certain guidelines, and we may be different, and we've got to accept also, yes, but there's some certain norms that we need to try to get to. And getting that balance right between this idea of conformity, which means it's suppressing independent thought, but allowing people to express independent thought within some constructs of normal behaviour, if you like, is a very difficult thing to get to.
Not saying shit all the time.
Not saying shit all the time. I have no problem with that. But it's true. I mean, sometimes, and this is why understanding culture and behavioural norms is so important, so difficult. And the other point I would say, made, which is tokenism. I see a lot of that, and unfortunately HRs can be guilty. Oh, but we put in a network for race, or we put in an LGBTQ plus network, job done. It isn't, and it's so much more than these things, and it really is understanding the cultural integrity and all of the other things which we've all described.
But reverse mentoring can then also be LGBTs
Oh,
mentoring
gosh, yeah,
non-LGBTs.
yeah.
It can be,
It's all
you know,
of those
autistic people
Yes,
mentoring
yes.
non-autistic. It can
Absolutely
be
agree, Charlotte. Yeah, I
just
mean,
turn it
I've got
upside
reverse
down.
mentees of
Turn
that
everything
nature.
upside down,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. One of my heroes, the creator of the inverted organisational chart, that's what he did. Turned the whole business upside down,
Yep.
and it wasn't fluffy because that business has just gone through the $10 billion mark. So inverted pyramids where you've got servant leaders at the bottom feeding the people at the coalface, making the money for the business, is a $10 billion win for HCL Technologies. So nothing fluffy there.
I was just going to, Vineet
Nair.
who wrote the book, Employees First, Customers Second, and described the upside down organisation.
One of
It's a great
my
model.
absolute heroes,
Yeah.
Vineet Nair,
Yeah.
and nothing
No,
fluffy there.
No.
And the chair of the IOD in Berkshire worked for Vineet Nair and said he was the hardest boss he ever had in his life, but the best boss he ever had in his life. So there we go. Table questions from the floor, I think, probably. Yes, we've got a question over here.
I'll stand because I can't see you all. But thank you all for your talks, they're so interesting. We were talking a little bit, and actually it's based on what you've just been talking about, this idea of business case versus politically correct. And we were talking a little bit about risk and how much do we challenge. From your opinions, to what extent do you think leaders are willing to accept kind of a more deeper understanding of systemic bias and things like power and privilege? And to what extent should we be a bit fragile when it comes to talking about those really deep and difficult discussions that can actually make a massive impact?
Who wants to take the lead on that one?
So what I touched on was, I think leaders need to lead. That's why we call them leaders. They need to lead difficult conversations. So conversational leadership is something that I'm signing up to a lot. They have to make themselves vulnerable to allow other people to become vulnerable. If you don't do it yourself, you're not allowing the space for other people. And that's very much a two-way thing. There are things about us individually we don't want to share because we know it will be held against us. And we all have that, I have that as well. And that's something we have to try to work our way through to actually allow that vulnerability to come out and say, yes, it's like this, and can we share and support each other? I mean, we're just talking about having menopause breakfast at the IOD. We were supposed to have one last week, but the flights didn't fly. But basically put it on the table, but not just menopause. Midlife crisis for men is not talked about enough, but it's a real thing. Things happen inside, and it's confusing, and it's uncomfortable, and suddenly you see yourself on a motorbike with a younger woman and you don't know what happens. We gotta talk about it.
But just to echo that thought, Charlotte, I mean, it's about power. The power relationship is so interesting. And how long have you used the language of my job is to empower, and you don't see it happening? Because they're using power to control, not to empower. Now, empower requires trust in two directions. Trust is, again, such an underrated asset of a business, but it's got to work both ways. And what I see a lot of is business leaders talking about the people need to trust me, and that the business leader's not trusting the people. So Vineet Nair was a good example of that again, is saying, no, I've got to trust, I've got to empower and trust the people on the front line to do the right thing for the customer, not me always telling them. But those old paradigms of work, a command and control and power usage in that way, are very deeply entrenched. And it's a generational thing in many ways. I mean, I do see new leaders coming in and say, well, why do you work like that, as we've all discussed. And I think, Laura, you touched on it, which it's a difficult thing to talk about when it was your father and you used some of those words about power and control. And then you're coming in as the next generation saying, hold on a second, that's not how we've got to run the business. And this is 21st century leadership. But it is hard to do with a generation that's grown up with the idea that I have power and I'm going to use power to control.
I think also, though, there's definitely something in there about, we ran a survey last year which we called the Cultural Economy Report that looked at the culture in small businesses. And one of the things we found was that the people in small organisations who are most at risk of mental health issues are the bosses, because there's nowhere for them to go. And I think there's something about the way we communicate as organisations that if a boss has the courage to be vulnerable, the organisation has to have the empathy with the boss to allow that vulnerability. So there's a give and take in that, which is a really complex thing, because for so long small business owners have felt the pressure of it's all on them. So there's definitely a two-way street that
That's
we
why
need to
we
get
have
to.
the IOD.
There you go. Brilliant.
We meet, we talk.
You'll come from that.
I mean, we see a lot of examples where the trust is broken down, and I think it's a situation where there's that old control model, and perhaps there's certain discriminations there, or maybe there's no discrimination, but they tolerate it on the ground, they just let it happen. And then it can be a small thing, a very small thing, that actually taken by itself looks quite ridiculous. Like, why this has happened to this employer? Why are they going to an employment tribunal? But it's not just that small thing, it's the tip of the iceberg, and there's such a lot of other things that are going on underneath it, which have built up slowly, but allowed to go unchecked. So it can be quite a dangerous culture if it's not addressed quite quickly at the top.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, to go back to what we were talking about earlier with regard to our next 5-year plan and that interview with all the team, when they've all come into my office to have that coffee and have that conversation, we've had to preempt that with we're looking at our next 5-year plan. We need to make sure that we invest in the right areas and recruit in the right areas and develop processes and procedures that are important to our future. And I don't really know what those are. And so I need to talk to you guys, my team, to find out what you think we need. Because if I sit up here in my ivory tower and go, right, what I think you need to do is this and what you need is that, and you should do this differently, then we're not going to get the engagement from the team to do that. So once they recognise that actually I was asking for their help, their insights, their knowledge, and asking them to share that with me, they trusted me because I was trusting them. And that's, that was key to why it is we now have our 700 projects.
And before I open up, what was the sort of impact of that in terms of the people's perception of coming up to your office to talk about this stuff? I mean, how was that sort of in their skin when they were coming up?
So certainly the first few were a little bit nervous about it, but it really was, and that's why we didn't set a time limit. We needed to make sure that we put them at ease and just kind of chatted before we sort of launched into, tell me a little bit more about, how you do your job. Forgive me, I don't quite understand what you mean by that. Can you explain it a bit more? I've never done, stores work, or I've never done, whatever it is. Can you, and really just very simply and gently just kind of let them explain what it is that they do. We have a monthly all-hands meeting, so the whole company gets together. So I'm able to sort of share the progress that we've made on this project. And so I've sort of said, Sam, she did our first one. She's totally fine, so you'll all be as fine as well. So, we've tried to make it a little bit light-hearted as well, in as much as, actually we're just information gathering. And it really is nothing more than that. You are the experts. You've been doing it for longer than we have, and we need for you to share that with us.
Cool stuff. Wolf. Question from the floor. Yes.
Hi, Mike Orchard from Skillside. We haven't talked much about recruitment. I think it's probably fair to say that IQ and extroversion are sort of the two main indicators of future performance in recruitment. What are the other traits that we need to prioritise to enable more diversion and inclusivity? Because not everyone has huge amounts of IQ and extroversion. I don't think it's necessarily the area we should focus on.
Laura, I know you've got a story around this, about recruiters and getting the right people into your business. Do you want to take the lead on this one?
Okay, yeah. So in terms of looking at how we recruit the people that we get, we need to make sure that we obviously get the best people into business. My job is to get the best people in my team, and sometimes that requires looking outside the box. It's really important that our recruiter understands what we're looking for, the fact that they don't have to tick all the boxes, and that we will do something different. So I've got my business development manager here with me today, We've always struggled with sales in manufacturing industry. So traditionally it's been an engineer that kind of understands the technical, that then needs to adopt a sales role in order to go out and sell the business. And engineering, people who traditionally like to lock themselves in a cupboard and work on a problem, to sort of force them out to go and do cold calling and sales is not a combination that is easy to find in people. So we've sort of done that a number of times, and we've bashed our head against the same brick wall, really not made much progress. So we thought, okay, well, let's just try something completely different. So David has a sales background. He comes from the car industry, BMW trained, so it's all about process with sales. He's got a fantastic reputation in that sector for knowing how to manage a sales process. So we've decided, let's try something different. Let's bring someone with the sales skill set into our business engineering sort of environment and just see whether that gives us a different result. So Blessing is sort of 3 months in at the moment, so it's a steep learning curve for him. But actually, if we adopt a process that is about sales, then he's being very successful at doing that. So it is about just trying something that's not what you've tried before, and just having an open mind when your recruiters bring you someone that doesn't necessarily tick all the boxes, and they need to understand that you have an open mind and put those people in front of you.
Educating your suppliers, basically.
I think it's also about when you're recruiting, what is your definition of inclusion? Because some businesses in the past get caught out. They've employed males and females, for example, equally, and then they've got caught out on age discrimination. So inclusivity is not just about one gender or another gender, or it's ethnic, it's age, it's disabilities. Inclusion includes a lot of things. So it's just bearing that in mind as well.
You're doing the line, so it's your turn.
Oh, okay, my turn. I would sort of dispute the premise, IQ and extroversion. I just so fundamentally disagree with that I think we just got to do everything possible to find the right people. I do pretty much every second interview that we're hiring at Breathe, and I don't look at the CVs because they don't tell me anything useful. Somebody who's done the interview before me has proved that person can do the job, but I'm much more interested in understanding the person that's behind it. And we just need to interview for the person, not for any particular perceived quality.
But they may not have got to that interview because of the way things are felt with
Potentially.
to that.
Yeah.
Sure.
Maybe
And
we
that's
should
my
interview
job as a
behind
leader
screen.
Yeah.
Maybe we shouldn't even look at them.
Yeah.
I don't like people with blue eyes. Like, what can I do about it, right? So, so I'm very much for sort of personality testing and everybody understanding. So we did, so back in the 90s when I was in dealing rooms in the city, we did a testing of the team. We were in 30 people. It like there's a bird personality, you're either an eagle or an owl or peacock or dove. So those four, and we all got put into those four. So the head of that team was a peacock, and then we had 27 peacocks. We literally had 27 peacocks, right? And then we had one eagle, and one owl, and one dove, and that was it, right? So you're looking at it like, oh, okay. So this back in the 90s, and we're now 30 years later, and we haven't really moved forward. That should be an integrated part of any process. Maybe the full psychometric testing is a bit deep, but it's very helpful, but maybe it's also expensive. So, but the basic, or Myers-Briggs, whatever, there's enough of them out there. What are you, and ensure that we don't have all the same kind. There's a good spread of the different personalities. I think that's key. And with that, you'll probably then start getting some different kind of talent to the table. And then on the diversity, conscious. You have to be conscious about it and have mapped it out. The different generations, the different backgrounds, the different genders, the different ethnicity, the different nationality. Conscious. You can't just flow with it and think it will happen. It doesn't. You have to consciously want to tick all those boxes in your organization.
Yeah, and inclusion starts with the recruitment, and you're right, Mike. I mean, whether you're working with search agencies or you've got your kind of massive process of trying to whittle down from a long list to a short list, all sorts of biases appear. Age discrimination. We've had a long view in business, we've got to recruit STEM graduates and all of this. Well, that's not inclusive. So you're absolutely right, Charlie. You've got to think about all these dimensions right from the get-go. Then you've got to think about the process and all the inherent biases that exist. And they're very challenging to overcome, as I touched on. I mean, recruiting people are different. I mean, we have all these debates now about AI. Is AI going to help or hinder? Is it biased of itself? And of course, if you build bias into AI, guess what? It's biased. But I do believe that AI will be part of the future, but we've really got to understand. We're going to unpick the black box and understand where we are building in bias, and a lot of those sorts of things happen. But I see other things going on, redacting CVs, taking names off them. So if you're called Mohammed, I'll take the name off. Well, at what point are you going to sit in front of somebody and recognise you're called Mohammed? I mean,
and so what?
And so what?
Yeah.
So I think we try these things we've all agreed today, which is a very important outcome, I think, that we've got to try some things and we've got to be prepared to look for the evidence as whether it's working or not. And if you find that redacting Mohammed off the CV is somehow working for you, okay, well, knock yourselves out. But there are a lot of things in recruitment we've got to think about very, very differently. We've got to try things.
But it's a journey, right?
It's a definite
and
journey.
This is where I come in, the maturity in it.
Yes.
We have to get to the place where it doesn't matter the colour of the skin of the person sitting in front of you. I don't want my children to get jobs on the colour of their skin.
No.
I just want them to get jobs on the talent they have, the raw talent, and the work they're prepared to put in. That's all, right?
But even on psychometric tests, I think there's a lot of involved bias in that. I mean, guess how psychometric tests like Myers-Briggs are developed? Largely on white, male communities.
Right.
There's a fascinating book called Invisible Women, and the lady who wrote it is coming to talk at our Future Work Conference in June. And talking all the biases, I mean, one of my favourite seat
She wrote
belts.
about the medical thing as well.
Yeah, the medical thing. Seat belts. Guess why more women get injured by seat belts? They're designed by men. So there's so much of this stuff we have to understand, and recruitment is where real inclusion starts.
Cool. Table the next, yes, over here.
My name's John Waters from a company called Demolish the Wall. Bearing in mind the recent Deloitte report into stress in the workplace, and it now becoming probably the biggest single reason due for staff sickness, and without doubt the biggest burden directly and indirectly on the NHS. What are you doing to identify and mitigate stress in your organisations?
I would go back to conversational leadership. You have to have the conversations, otherwise you don't find out. As you also, you have the conversations, things will come out, and encourage people to bring by leading that conversation yourself. I mean, and well done bringing your conversation to the table. Of course, that's what we need, but it takes allowing yourself to be vulnerable, and most of today's leaders are not willing or able to do that. That's the problem we need to address.
And I think the conversations need to happen way before somebody shows any sign
Absolutely.
of stress, because it's this the concept that I love of the idea of the stress bucket, that different things build up the level of stress in a person, and it's often the seemingly silly, inconsequential thing that tips them over the edge. There's no tea bags in the kitchen, or and that's not downplaying it all. It's having those conversations so that you understand the people who work for you, with you, so you can see the early signs when they're not behaving like they normally
I
behave.
think it's such an important subject you've raised. I mean, we've done lots of surveys which point at the same thing. Stress is the biggest source of absenteeism from work, and it's getting worse. And the world we're living in with all this uncertainty, interestingly, you look at well-being, financial insecurity, all these sorts of things. But stress is also positive, right? We have to understand that. I mean, all these behavioural science research shows that people come up a peak of operating on stress, then they tip over very quickly onto the other side. And it is not a single curve. Every person is different. And understanding that, having the conversation. So I might work in a particular way, and I do, and I probably stress a lot of my team out because of how I work. So I have to talk to them, say, look, just because I'm doing emails on a Sunday night, I'm expecting this, you've got to tell me, is that working for you? And be open to that kind of challenge. Because stress trickles down a lot. And I've talked to a lot of business leaders about this. They say, why can't all these people do what I do? They said, because they're not you, and they don't work like you. And why should they work like you? And I mean, I made those examples of younger generations coming into the workplace and said, why on earth would I have to work like that? Is that what work is about? That I've got to work sort of 50 hours a week And if I don't work hard enough, I get told off, and I get answer all my emails overnight, and now I've got social media and I got to do all this stuff. That cannot be the future of work.
One of the
So
things
it's
we've done
very
just on
important.
that very point actually is bending our, on a small scale, bending our roles to fit people's family lives rather than expecting them to bend their family lives to fit our roles. And that's working so effectively because they feel, really committed because actually they're not doing it in conflict with their home life, they're doing it in confluence. And that's made a massive difference. And I think that really is something that small businesses can really seize ground on because the big monsters are very slow. And you made the point earlier on, financial services, which is where I'm in. It's terrible at this stuff. They're in the dark ages of this stuff, so it's still a much.
But you're right, I mean, the whole flexible working idea is definitely one of those responses, but it's a big cultural shift, as I touched on. I mean, we have this presenteeism. Presenteeism, interesting, has become a bigger problem than absenteeism.
I mean, in our business, Kate, who is also our HR director, she's our mental health first aider. So we invested in that role in-house. But she also spends a great deal of her time on the shop floor, getting to know the team and making sure she understands, the challenges that they face. I think when you run a business and you start to realise the challenges that everyone have outside of work, because you're privy to information that the rest of the team aren't, you realise that everybody, almost without exception, is dealing with some sort of issue outside of work, whether it's a child that's going through bullying, a sick parent, a spouse that's unwell. And so she's aware of all that. And so she's a step ahead of the curve. But we're a small team. So she's able to link in to be
But you're
able
still
to
doing it in a 50, 60 person business. So by SME standards, that's not necessarily small. And it is a commitment. That is exemplary. That's an exemplary sort of behaviour. If you can do it in a manufacturing business of 50, 60 people, then anybody in this room can do it.
But that comes back to both of you talked about line managers and training line managers. Now that's where it's got to go in bigger organisations, isn't it?
Yeah. Or there will be different kind of. There's nothing worse than middle management, right? It's hell to be middle management, it's hell to deal with them up and down. It's just not a great place. So a much flatter structure where you have different kind of maybe teams of what you have. So here's the health team, and they work around with everybody. But actually, everyone can reach the top very quickly if needs be. But you have, instead of having, this is right, man, you have to go here, to go there, to go there. Actually, it's much, no, there's this over here that will support you if you start feeling. It has to be spaghetti, right? Not silos.
Yeah, I mean, we go back to our manufacturing strategy that I talked about earlier. Under our health and safety element, in our sort of nirvana area, we've got that no one's going to go home from work feeling worse than when they arrived. And so that is, going back to your point, is about the team to make sure that, if someone is even a bullying element or excluding people from their team, that needs to be addressed by the supervisors and managers in those areas. So that is what we are striving to try and achieve and give our management and supervisor teams the skill set to be able to keep their eyes open to recognise these things, and also the skill set to be able to have those difficult conversations.
Nobody goes home feeling worse than when they came in.
But make sure you're looking after managers too. I mean, a lot of this stuff is saying, okay, so we've got to make sure the managers are trained and they're going to worry about it. Well, managers are very vulnerable too. I mean, there's fascinating stuff from the, what they call research on well-being over your life cycle, and guess what? It goes up as you get into your late teens, early 20s, and then guess where it goes from there. And it only starts to pick up, interesting as my life stage, late 50s, early 60s, and it starts to pick up again. So where are most of your managers? They're in that dip, because they've got all those other strengths. So the only thing I'd just say when you have things like mental health first aid is, for goodness sake, make sure you're looking after the mental health first aiders, because the mental health first aiders often are the people who volunteer to be a first aider, because they themselves have experienced it and they themselves are vulnerable. So this has got to be a very collective thing. It's not just about, well, middle management sorted all that, because interestingly, they're often the most stressed.
Absolutely. I told my son never be an operations manager. One final question. The young man in the room.
Sorry, Tom Nicholson from Surrey University. You talked a lot about reverse mentoring and the shadow boards, junior boards, all that sort of stuff. What are you looking for with these sort of junior leaders that you're looking for?
Difference. We're looking for someone who dares being different, and we find that a lot with younger people. So the IOD will start this year to work closer with universities and have students being reverse mentors to our members across the UK for as many as we can get out. And then the next step from that is hopefully after a student they will become an associate, and then there will be an opportunity to have advisory boards, we will call them, or next gen advisory boards, but actually bring those people so all of our businesses can then have these students that we have taken on a journey to be advisory boards for them on a voluntary basis, but that's how they build their board skills. And what they have to be is courageous enough to put the conversation on the table, which I find that young people are inherently. So that often comes on its own, because actually they have so much information come their way and it's using it in the right way. So it's not your typical, has to be someone who's super ambitious and doing this and this. It's the whole range. You know, neurodiverse people, people from different social backgrounds, people who never wear a tie. You know, all the differences we need to bring to the table to have the most outcome and get the most. I mean, in other places I work with boards who specifically asking me, can you bring to us next gen boards? And then so I had to think of a scalable way, and the IOD is that scalable way where we can actually do that as an organization and everybody can benefit from it.
I mean, just a couple of big thoughts. We've been doing a lot of work on what are sort of core and essential skills. I mean, it's fascinating how long we've debated things like employability skills and all these other things and never come up with any consistent definition. And many young people coming into work think it's all about their CVs and how many qualifications. Yet you've all acknowledged, and most businesses I've talked to say, well, I'm not even looking at the CV. One of you said that. I'm looking for these other attributes. So what are these other attributes? And we need a clear definition of them. And they are things like critical thinking and empathy and collaboration, communication skills, things of that nature. The sad thing is that there are a lot of young people coming into work who think it's not only about their qualifications, but they can't easily demonstrate these skills, which we're actually really looking for. And I see, and I talked a bit about socioeconomic status. This is also about social mobility. If we understand that what we're looking for, things like critical thinking, all these other things, you can do that. I don't care what background you came from, and it's a very inclusive idea. So we're working with groups like the Social Mobility Commission because we need to get this into the education system. We do not have enough good advice for young people coming out of schools. They're constantly told what they've got to do is go to university and that's their route to riches, and that is not true. And businesses are saying looking for other things now. So that's a very important part of this dialogue as well.
I suppose from our perspective, it really is just the fact that someone's going to come in and go, why do you do it like that? Where we've all got blind to the fact that we've been doing like that for ages, and just some fresh eyes and a fresh perspective with no learned behaviours from anywhere else in business, just for them to just ask the obvious question.
And how does the business find a young person that wants to be a leader, and how does that young person who wants to be a leader find that business? I'm not entirely sure yet, I'm still looking, but if someone's got the answers, let me know.
You know.
And I think behind the why is a genuine interest. It's not necessarily just we're stupid. It's actually, why is it done like that? There must have been a reason at some point it was done like that. Maybe there wasn't, but you know, real genuine why.
Ladies and gentlemen, your panel, thank you very much.
Hello, I'm from Breathe HR, and I'm just here to kind of say that we're extremely proud to be sponsoring this event for the IOD and CIPD, mainly because talking about culture and inclusivity and diversity is something that really aligns with the culture of Breathe as an internal company, but we always try and kind of encourage anyone who uses our software, but also who we partner with as well, to kind of really challenge themselves. And that's the theme that I'm getting from today, is to really kind of go home, look at what we can do to challenge ourselves personally, but also as a business. And that is something that Breathe in particular really, really wants to do as well. So please come and see us, have a chat with us. We've got a culture economy report, as Jonathan mentioned, and you're welcome to take copies of that as well.
Thank you to Breathe HR, and thank you also